All right. Welcome back. Welcome back to the show. This is an early show with your host, Young Brando from Los Angeles. Mike David, nice to see you, man. Kia ora. Send my greetings to New Zealand. Wonderful to see you. I will try to see if it's still worth to take a look at the In Eichen auctions. It may or may not have been closed. So I wanna see. I think it closed. Yeah, it did. Um, but we can kind of look at the results for that tourbillon auction because it was divided to two parts at any rate, and we'll see how the things transpired. And it really seems that most pieces actually didn't sell, so they are gonna have a good time organizing part two. If you take a look right here, this was the auction we were looking at a few days ago. An auction organized by In Eichen from out of Zurich, with an online exclusive of about, I think, 30, 33, 34 lots, all of which are tourbillons, some usual suspects like Breguet, like Gégé de Coultre, um, Audemars Piguet, but also Omega, Cartier, Roger Dubuis, and many other interesting brands. There was even this Julius Assmann number 4, an early 2000s piece by Glashütte Original, which pays a tribute to Saxonian watchmaking. Anyway, but as you can see, a lot of pieces, having received so many bids, um, were not sold because they did not actually meet the reserve. I think it's more than half, in fact, of pieces that didn't sell. But we can get back to that momentarily. I wanted to start with this new Tag Heuer Carrera that came out in 42 millimeters and dressed in the colors of the French flag. There's a nice textured blue dial with silvered white registers for the chronograph, crosshair register for the continuous running seconds at 6, which is interrupted with a small aperture for the date indicator, and the red accents complete the picture for this tricolor flag. Of course, the blue, white, and red are the colors of the French flag. I think it's perhaps offensive to even um, clear that up, but this is part of the Carrera revival they are having currently because I think more recently the brand decided to perhaps move on from reissues, which might be the right thing to do for them, honestly, because as much as I appreciate vintage Hoya, especially vintage Hoya chronographs, Carrera being my favorite, with the Monaco being a close second, I think it doesn't really move the brand forward in the way they would like, because every time they release a reissue, either it is considered a failure and it's not liked, that's much more rare. But even when it's successful, it's usually too successful for its own good and for Hoya's brand today, because it ends up just reminding more and more people of how great they were and how the mighty have fallen and how they will always continue to fall short of their iconic and golden era of the 60s. So I think it's a good direction of the brand. Not that they should necessarily give up on these lines, on these names, on these product families. Not that they should stop producing chronographs or anything, but I think they should probably stop making reissues and limited editions at every single anniversary and focus on reimagining some of these pieces using the classic case shapes as a canvas to see what they can do to innovate. Um, at the end of the day, that is part of the frustration that people have with Omega, and I think it has caused major fatigue, um, especially now with the increasing upmarket trajectory that both Tag Heuer and Omega are experiencing. I think they should start really substantiating, really putting some substance behind all those price increases that they have done in the recent years. I kind of like the skeletonized steering wheel design they have for this oscillating weight, which in this case is in blue to match the shade of the dial, and even, of course, the rally style leather band, perforated. I think this is a cool aesthetic, even though I've always thought that 42 is a little too large, but that's just my personal preference. Hey, JJ, nice to see you. And yeah, like Junior says, right? This is how we think about Hoya. I wish they just let Tag go. I wish they just did things like the old. And the more they give us that, the more they make models where they have the Hoya logo rather than the newer logo, the more they reissue some of the icons from their past, the more we get stuck there. I think they need to move on because clearly this has not necessarily allowed them to gain the kind of market share, gain the kind of prominence, gain the kind of um, following that they have perhaps been hoping for. I think it's a very thick watch, Mike David, and not in a good way. So we're talking about a THICK kind of situation rather than THICC. As you can see, this is, I believe, 15.7. Love the marketing language that Monochrome Watches has here. This edition, which measures 42 millimeters in diameter with a respectable height of 15.7. Nothing respectable about making chronographs that are way too thick. That just means that you didn't really bother to develop a high caliber movement. So 15.7 is a little outrageous, if you ask me, even for a 42 millimeter watch. So that makes the piece a little more unwieldy, but it is a very handsome looking piece, at least from these photographs or renderings. I genuinely like this particular setup, and I think the Hoya 02 is actually a very good movement in terms of its performance capabilities. I mean, the fact that it has 80 hours of power reserve, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, at 4 hertz, which is the standard modern frequency, of course, 28,800 semi oscillations per hour. Column wheel vertical clutch, which means that you have a very uh, pleasant, by and large, haptic experience with the start, stop, and reset functions without experiencing any stutter of the chronograph seconds when you start and stop. That credit mostly goes to the column wheel part of the technology. Vertical clutch usually means that the running of the chronograph seconds hand, the centrally deployed one, doesn't necessarily introduce any uh, additional wear and tear or drain on the movement. So it is, in fact, a boon for people like me who like even letting a lot of hand wounds and non-vertical clutch um, vintage chronographs simply running because I don't know. I think it's a more romantic look. It kind of gives me um, a kind of anxiety to see the chronograph seconds hand standing completely still at 60. That is Sea Dweller thick, right? So that's I think that's a great point, Mike David, because once again, when it comes to functionality, right, we do know that extremely thin, ultra thin watches, ultra thin case designs might not necessarily lend themselves really well to making genuinely waterproof watches, right? A lot of these very elegant, slick watch designs, with the Nautilus being perhaps um, a resounding exception, uh, they're usually around 30 meters or 100 meters water resistant. Their depth rating usually clocks out at 10 atmos, whereas you look at Nautilus being an exception again is 120. You look at modern dive pieces like the Sea Dweller, like the Submariner, you go all the way up to 300 and more. And a lot of times, this is the kind of case construction that um, increases the thickness of the watch. That being said, obviously, for everyday purposes, even for a sports watch, it's highly questionable that you would ever need more than 100 meters, more than 10 atmos of a depth rating, but certainly 100 meters and above gives you a little bit more reassurance if you actually want to use these watches in active situations, especially wet situations, whether you are talking about a dip in the pool or swim out there in the open seas. This particular piece is apparently only available in the French markets, limited to 200 units, and the retail price is 6,350 in euro. I think it's a very handsome watch, if a little unwieldy. And if it is indicative of the general direction that Tag Heuer is going um, for the future, I think it's a good sign. I would like to see them moving away from making reissues and reeditions all the time, even as they remain somewhat loyal in the most general sense to the Heuer legacy. I would like to see them invent. I would like to see them make things a little more exciting, because the heritage angle serves you only so far unless you can build that into genuine excitement about what you are really bringing to the table, what is unique for year 2023. I'm not saying they should completely stop making any reissues. You know, of course, when it's the 60th anniversary of the Carrera, the Panda that they made was a beautiful watch. Let's go back to that, and I think um, it sold really well too. And of course, that was a limited edition too, and it didn't take them too much time to move them. I hope they still have it on the website because it was a very handsome one and sold incredibly well and quite fast as well. So I'm not saying that they should completely stop making watches like that, but hey, maybe wait until 75 or at least to 70, right? You don't really have to make these kinds of anniversary watches at every turn. I love, by the way, their website. You know, that animation gives me chills each time. Look how it sets to your time and then starts the chronograph. It's beautiful. Yeah, this sold quite fast, was 600 pieces, and it was priced perhaps a little um, higher than the average Tag Heuer watch, but I think it wasn't completely unreasonable um, in today's day and age in the way that it combined the classic aesthetic with a slightly more modernized size of 39 millimeters and, of course, the modern H2O, I was going to say HO2 movement. And in this case, I think it was relatively thin too. Let me see. Yeah, it was 14.5. Again, not necessarily the thickest or thinnest, but manageable for a self-winding chronograph. Of course, the vintage classic was 36 millimeters and 13 millimeters in height, 13 millimeters in thickness, which of course is easier to achieve in an important sense since that was a hand wound piece, since that was a hand wound caliber that runs the piece. Let me see if I have any of these pieces in my notepads at Chrono 24. I do not necessarily the Panda, but a few interesting examples of classic Hoya chronographs that we can take a look at. Just give me a second, guys. Since the 60th anniversary is largely a recreation of 2447, and in this case, of course, of the S and Soleil referring to the silvered background, the primary dial, and Noir referring to the black chronograph registers. I'll show you a few examples of that model and similar pieces. like for example, this 2447 T. Hey, Thomas Broadbent, nice to see you. So this is the 2447. Oh, sorry, that's not it. This is the 2447S. That's actually is double signed as well. Once retailed by Baya, has a patinated dial that has kind of turned into an eggshell color with some extra discoloration in certain spots, which is not unseen, of course, when it comes to these kinds of pieces. A decimal track for the seconds printed in blue on the perimeter of the dial. Here is the movement, signed Hoya Leonidas in the bridge, on the bridge, I should say. Of course, that movement is built on the Valjoux 72 base, which makes this watch even more attractive to many passionate fans of this vintage chronograph genre. That base, of course, powered many other iconic chronographs, including the Rolex Daytona and even certain pre-Daytona Rolex chronographs. And as you can see, considering the nice condition of the case, the largely well-preserved dial, and the double signature, there is some premium attached to this, but compared to so many other collectible chronographs from the era, from the 60s, a Hoya Carrera is still very much a bargain, or a relative bargain, I should say, comparatively speaking. Of course, as with everything else, the price point has ascended to another level in the last few years. And this particular piece, retailed and signed on the dial by Baya as well, is listed for around $12,000 on Chrono24 by a professional dealer out of Germany. There is one that I saw with the tachymeter on the periphery of the dial, printed in red. I really like this particular one. I'm a big fan of the pushers as well. Real piston-like look on the pump pushers. Great case. Very well preserved dial overall. And something like this can be had for around, 7.5, 8,000. This is just one example that I was able to call up almost immediately. And then if that's your vibe, and you guys know that I like the 2 register pieces as well. Here is another alternative. Let me see. which is a 7753. And that's Valjoux 7730 movement, which basically is the predecessor of the 7750, which is the automatic version of that movement. So the reason that some of these pieces are less desirable than the 2447 reference number, Carreras, is because people have a softer spot for Valjoux 72 compared to Valjoux 7730, which has the cam switching chronograph movement rather than the classic column wheel configuration of the Valjoux 72, which powers the reference 2447. As you can see here, cam switching, cam and lever rather than the column wheel. And this particular piece is posted on Chrono 24 by a Japanese dealer with a fixed price. But again, if you can grab a 2447 around the same price point, I think that's a much better deal. And relatively speaking, again, I think a Hoya Carrera in the vintage markets from among 60s chronographs is a great option, especially if you prefer a more classic appearance that can easily lean on the dressier end of the spectrum, right? I can certainly see something like this. Again, a leather strap with contrast stitching is great, even on a NATO strap, to bring out the most sporty version of the chronograph. But something like this on a pure black leather strap, maybe something like a crocodile, alligator style strap, it would look smoking and would make a great dress watch as well. Whereas, of course, if you go into this era, again, a relative bargain is presented with the Breitling Navitimer, especially if you can find clean versions, which is much harder, thanks to the unique slide rule bezel, of course, which compromises the integrity of the case in terms of waterproofness and dustproofness and whatever else. But the Navitimer, of course, is a much sportier chronograph, even at first glance, right? In the sense that it is, in a way, much more out there, much more playful, much more visually attractive. I'm not saying it as a positive or negative term, but just neutrally, much more dynamic in terms of the expression of the dial. This is a reference 806, very clean example of the big eye, so to speak, with the larger chronograph registers in the reverse panda configuration, twin planes. Something like this. can be gotten somewhere between $4,000 to $6,000, and this particular example is right under 6,000. It says professional dealer out of Denmark. I would like to get a little more information about this piece if I were to pull the trigger, but it is certainly very interesting. I believe the hands are service hands. That being said, the rest of the watch looks rather good. Of course, this is something that I just fished out, so I didn't really have time to study, so I can't give you an incredibly solid recommendation of it, but it is a very nice looking piece indeed. Absolutely. That's actually a great point, Mojal. I'm dubious of double stamped watches unless I have proof, original receipt, and papers or confirmation from the retailer. Baya is actually pretty good when it comes to confirmation. So it would make a lot of sense to reach out to them and have it checked against their records. They may or may not charge a little bit for that service. And again, they don't necessarily owe you that service to certify your piece. But I would certainly look into that. If you're serious about buying a piece that is signed on the dial, I would actually not even trust the receipts. I would be willing to see something from the actual retailer in terms of certification, because receipts, anyone can fake them. Trust me. If people have faked in the past, like wines of important vintage from scratch, reproducing vintage stickers and everything, I wouldn't trust someone with a handwritten receipt from the vintage era. Hey, Junior, looking forward to having you back. Uh-huh. I said exactly the same thing, Mojal, but I'm glad you're repeating it in the chat. That's good. Sometimes emphasis serves everyone well. So we started with talking about Hoya and how they had this limited edition for France. In this particular model, 200 pieces, right around 6,400 in euro. And we have moved onto a more wide-ranging conversation about 60s pieces, especially the Carrera 2447, which is one of the icons and also shares the base of the Valjoux 72 with many other iconic chronographs, including the Rolex Daytona. Of course, there's a reason Valjoux 72 is preferred to, say, Valjoux 7730, and that's not just the name Daytona, but also because the technology that drives them is distinct. By and large, it is safe to say that column wheel chronographs have a leg up compared to cam and lever or cam switching systems, especially in terms of the reliability and consistency of the start-stop functions. And from a technical perspective, they simply have more components. They are a little more difficult to produce. So it makes sense for watches that have column wheel chronograph movements to cost a little bit more, both in the vintage market and for new watches as well. Everyone's favorite entry-level integrated bracelet watch gets new additions to the family. Now, Tissot's PRX Powermatic 80, the self-winding version of the line, also has the reduced sized complement. So the 35 millimeter was previously largely available with the quartz movement, but now you have 4 new pieces in that line. They have been continuously expanding this line by adding different dial colors, some of which proved really popular. All shades of blue have been all the hype for a while now, especially for this particular category of integrated bracelet stainless steel sports watch. They have recently, pardon me, they have recently introduced the ice blue, or you might call it by some other name. That certainly has been very popular as well. They also have, I believe, a kind of more Tiffany blue or robin's egg kind of situation in one of the pieces, if I can recall it now. Let me see. I think that's a quartz only version. I was thinking this particular piece. Of course, they have also more recently added the ice blue, which has very ably catered to that hype. And now there's a reduced sized version compared to the regular 40 millimeter, which is due to the design, the integrated look, the contours of the bracelet can actually wear much larger. Hey, Robert, nice to see you, man. Please hit the like button, by the way. That always helps, even, well, not even, especially for a small channel like this. 1 or 2 more hits on the upvote, on the thumbs up, makes all the difference. We were talking about the new models in Tissot's PRX line, which add significant options with the mechanical movements at the 35. They have that waffle pattern on the dial, the brushed steel case, which is broken up by the polished bezel, providing a nice and pleasing contrast to the eye. And the price point is still right under 700, 695, but the dimensions are quite compact, with the thickness also right under 11 millimeters, which is again quite interesting for a watch at this price point. I have previously said that I would much rather look at something like this than going at Christopher Ward's new 12, which I think is extremely generic and still expensive for no discernible reason. I understand that the entire category can be maligned as being too iterative, too much of the same thing over and over. And I think the fatigue is slowly setting in. I think it seems even impossible to see out, but maybe in a couple or few years we might actually see this hype die down a little bit. But currently, every single brand basically sees the need of entering this space. Um, and who can blame them? As you guys know, uh, long time ago, not every car manufacturer felt the need to have a sports utility vehicle. But since um, since the Porsche Cayenne was so successful, every single manufacturer now felt the need to enter that space, and it's who can really blame them since they are commercial entities and don't want to leave that kind of money on the table. So it's expected that every single watch manufacturer will come through with their own option of an integrated bracelet watch, some of which are more or less successful, some of which are more or less imaginative. And it doesn't surprise me to see now in this, what you can consider to be maybe a third wave, even of the integrated bracelet watch craze. You have brands like Christopher Ward, which have moved away at a certain point of making homage watches, producing watches like the 12, which seems like a cheap copy of the Chapek Antarctique, which is kind of sad, right? You are kind of you are the copy of a copy of a copy, and you don't really have anything unique going on. At least Chapek has their beautiful movement, which they actually both from a technical perspective and aesthetic perspective devised for the first time as their manufacture caliber. This is the Christopher Ward 12, which I am not afraid to say is a complete homage of Chapek Antarctique. And it is sold, by the way, for more than 2 times the price tag as the Tissot PRX. Let me see. Right, look at this, for example. And then this. I mean, I don't even know what to call uh, that level of lack of imagination. It's just sad at this point. But what can you do? I wanted to take a look at how the results of the In Eichen auction went. Earlier today, they had a timed and curated auction on Tourbillon that concluded. It had started on June 12th and ended on June 25th. As I mentioned previously, there are so many pieces that didn't actually meet the reserve. As you can see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's pretty bad actually, because I think they have only ended up selling like 5 out of 30 pieces, which is a devastating result. And I don't know, I guess they have really chosen relatively high reserve prices, so they didn't actually find that value. Let's start with one that actually sold. This is Omega Deville Tourbillon, which is quite expected from Omega, but once every so often they have these sorts of interesting high horological pieces, 38.5 millimeters of a case diameter in this pink gold piece. A very nice guilloche decorated dial with dagger-like indices, which combine really well with the heat-blued hands. The tourbillon is given prominence with the cage installed right at the center of the dial and framed with polished pink gold seconds track. Of course, there's that lozenge-shaped heat-blued hand that pivots on the tourbillon and thus serves as a seconds hand. And the tourbillon cage also integrates the brand's symbol, which is the letter Omega. The two hands for the hour and minutes are actually integrated into that tourbillon cage that is the focal point of the dial. And they kind of have this abbreviated look. I think this is a very beautiful and unique piece for Omega. Individually numbered on the back, as you can see, engraved on the case back. With the matching déployant clasp. This piece actually sold for, let's get it to the US dollar amount, 34,600. That was a fixed price of $39,050, which could have ended the auction at any minute, but the seller seems to have gotten a relative bargain. Once again, these auctions by In Eichen Zurich don't actually have buyer's premium, so there is that added incentive for some to participate. Another piece that actually sold was this Ballon Bleu Flying Tourbillon in white gold. Reference number is 3089. Very cool dial design in this kind of partial open working that puts the slightly elongated Roman numerals into sharp relief, which form the part of the hour markers in the upper half of the dial. The secret signature is translated onto 10 o'clock in this particular execution, which happens, although not as often as the 7 o'clock, but you can see the reason here because you have a relatively oversized tourbillon cage that is placed at around 6 o'clock. It is encircled with a railroad track for the seconds, and quite beautifully, that tourbillon cage integrates the initial of the maison, and in that sort of wishbone styled logo that you can also recognize in their tank buckles. And of course, the tip of that wishbone actually serves as a second indicator too, as the tourbillon makes its complete revolution in 1 minute, 60 seconds, heat blued broadsword hands made out of stainless steel for the hour and minutes. And under that partially skeletonized part of the dial, you have a guilloche decorated silvered background, which has a classic vague or wave styled decoration. The case, especially if you figure in the uniquely styled crown guard structure of the Ballon Bleu, I think is quite large. I want to say almost 45 millimeters, maybe even 46. There is a sapphire cabochon that sits on that crown with the beaded grip, and this piece is made out of 18 karat white gold. A very nice integration into the leather band. Quite an interesting piece of design. Again, you can see the tourbillon bridge on the back, which integrates again that double wishbone Cartier logo, matching déployant clasp. The Ballon Bleu might be quite large and sort of like a dinner plate on the wrist, but a lot of the examples, especially this flying tourbillon, is quite slender. So it has that sort of elegant kind of profile on the wrist. I believe it's less than 7 millimeters thick, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that. Maybe I can find. Oh no, I'm completely off the mark with that. I do apologize. It's apparently 13 millimeters thick. I believe that domed crystal makes quite a difference, but still, for a flying tourbillon, it's not so bad at all. This one at lot 10 actually sold for 27,900, which is quite a decent grab. I have to say it is a decent deal, relatively speaking. A very elegant flying tourbillon, quite attractively designed. If you like the Ballon Bleu case, this would be a decent deal. No surprise that it was one of the pieces that actually sold. Let's see what else sold. There's the Breguet Marine equation of time perpetual calendar. So I will get back to that because that's one of the more interesting pieces. The open worked Breguet tourbillon also right here. This was lot 33. It had a fixed price of $83,600. It sold for it sold for $78,050. That was the final hammer price. You can see this impressive machine. A tourbillon cage at 6 o'clock, which doubles up as a subsidiary dial for seconds with the stainless steel heat blued hand sitting on the pivot. There is also a power reserve indicator and a very interesting and elegant retrograde 24-hour hand as well. The Breguet frosted ring for the hour track with the dial installed at around 12 o'clock and apple-shaped palm style Breguet hands for the hour and minutes. You have an open worked dial that is exquisitely decorated with circular graining seen throughout and elements of guilloche and freehand engraving also shining through. The tourbillon bridge is by and large very nicely polished as well. And the heat blued screws that are exposed combine quite beautifully with the heat blued stainless steel hands as well. This was a 40 millimeter pink gold case from around year 2000, so right before the Swatch acquisition of the brand. As you can see, you get a good view from the case back as well, and perhaps, in fact, a better sight of a lot of the freehand engraving on these skeletonized bridges. And the piece actually came with the presentation box as well as what looks like the documents but it can be simply the product literature. So not sure if it included papers, but this particular piece sold for $78,050 at the Hammer, and it was lot 33 in the In Eichen Zurich auction that concluded earlier today, and that was exclusively focused on tourbillon pieces. Many of the watches went unsold, so I expect them to appear again in the second round of this sale. Here is something that is a little more humble by Chrono Swiss. Chrono Swiss, as you guys know, has made the regulator style dial their bread and butter ever since their early inception. And this is a great, I think this is a great expression of their style, because it also has those beautiful engine turned guilloche dial in this silvered pure look with the hour dial moved to 12 o'clock with a basket weave motif at its center, a traditional barleycorn motif for the larger part of the dial takes center stage as a form of guilloche decoration. The tourbillon cage is at minute 30, roughly speaking. The handset is in the style of spade, so you have the hour hand there, and then the centrally deployed minute hand, which is the focal point of the watch, has this elegant twisted style. And the tourbillon has one of the screws, actually, the flying tourbillon has one of its screws heat blued. So in fact, as it completes its revolution in 1 minute, you can trace the seconds with the help of that heat blued screw as well. I really love their case design, the officer style with extended and screwed through lugs. The knurled bezel and the oversized onion crown. This is a really stunning watch. I think was an interesting bargain. So not really surprised that it sold and sold so well. A 38 millimeter yellow gold case. An engine turned dial made out of solid sterling silver. Flying tourbillon with the cage at minute 30. Regulator style layout, which is an important part of the Chrono Swiss aesthetic since their inception. And the officer style case, which has both an elegant and rather rugged appearance, even though it is actually quite a conservative style. Here's a view of the rhodium-plated movement, decently decorated with stripes on the bridge plates, which are also beveled. perlage decorated base plate, heat blued screws. This is a double barrel movement which has a 72-hour power reserve. All of this information is very nicely written out um, on the bridge plates of the movement. I want to actually figure out who made the movement for them, or what kind of base they used, perhaps. Not sure if I can immediately find it. Let's see. Hmm. A matching yellow gold deployant clasp. I believe these still exist in the brand's catalog somehow and sell around 25,000 US dollars. So it's a pretty decent deal when it's sold for 12,300 without buyer's premium. That was lot 29 in the recently concluded in Eichen Zurich timed auction that focused on the tourbillon. Unfortunately, one of the only handful watches that actually sold at this auction. And I think finally, we also have the Breguet Marine, which is a perpetual calendar with time. I think I'm going to conclude after this watch, but if you want me to delve into any of these particular watches before I close and give you some horological and historical detail, feel free to send in the lot number with the chat, with a super chat. I have posted the link there. I'll be back at night in about 6 hours. This is the Breguet Marine, which at once serves as Breguet's entry into that elegant sports watch category. It is also a watch that honors the tradition of Breguet having made marine chronometers, with specifically Abraham Louis Breguet being the official watchmaker of the Royal Navy in his time. This particular piece has a dial that is produced out of a gold blank in a striking blue with a hand guilloche wave decoration in the middle, which is one of the most unique and quite impressive in the way that it plays with light. The primary dial is placed in this off-center fashion, so it sits actually on a base that is itself guilloche decorated, and that gives the dial a little more visual interest. At around 5 o'clock, you have the tourbillon cage. The perpetual calendar you have in the form of two apertures, one at around 10 o'clock for the day of the week, and one at around 2 o'clock, which indicates both the month and the leap year right next to it. The date is actually indicated with a retrograde hand, which has an anchor-like tip, playing with that nautical evocation. The date is indicated along this scale, which is in the shape of a downward-facing crescent in the upper part of the dial. And there is also another hand for the equation of time. The case is a little different from the traditional Breguet house style, at least in recent time, because it doesn't have the teardrop lugs, but it certainly has that fluted case band. The crown guards are in the style of a propeller, again playing with that nautical imagery. The case is almost 44 millimeters. It is executed in luxurious and hefty platinum. With these uniquely styled lugs, at least for Breguet. Like a single block of extension that screws through to attach to the leather strap. In this case, I'm sure there's an option for rubber as well. And here is a stunning view of the case back, which has the bridge plates entirely decorated with a compass rose. Also depicted on the back of the piece. On the mainspring barrel, on the cap for the mainspring barrel, I should say. And I believe this opening right around 8 o'clock is a power reserve indicator as well. Very subtle and nice detail. The model is called Marine Tourbillon Equation Marchande, reference 5887, in a beautiful combination of a platinum case and a hand engraved, hand turned guilloche dial in a striking shade of blue, matching déployant clasp. With the full set of documents and the box, including the outer packaging. This piece at lot 13 of the In Eichen Zürich's recently concluded auction actually sold for $156,050 in US dollars. And considering that it sells, I think the pink gold version is much more expensive than that to begin with. Yeah, the platinum version is around $250,000 in list price. So once again, that was a decent deal for whoever actually grabbed this piece. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with me. This was a nice early stream. Feel free to come back in about 6 hours for the late show. We have so much more to talk about. Feel free to check in. Feel free to jump on the panel. I look forward to seeing you again. Please hit the like button on the way out and feel free to drop in a comment. If you want to contribute to the channel, you know how. The links are included in the video description. They are now crawling in that rolling ticker, and I am just now dropping them in the chat as well. So if you would like to help the channel grow, feel free to make a contribution, or at least spread the word, promote it in other social media platforms. It helps a great deal. And if you can help me reach a bigger audience, that is really actually the greatest help, the greatest push you can give to this channel. So I look forward to seeing the channel grow with you. I'm glad to have you in my community. Hit the like button. I'll see you on the other end in about 6 hours. Take care.